Oh boy, I haven't talked about a game that I've made in voice format since I was like 7. This is Rigby Bradshaw working towards the game Spaceship Renegade. Before I start, I should mention all the music in the game was taken from the Pony Island soundtrack. I was told we were allowed to use any music that we legally own, so I went and bought the Pony Island soundtrack for like 99 cents since it was both a game with a good soundtrack and something that would fit this environment. So, during the dev process, this whole design kept changing a little bit each time until I found something that really worked. First up, as you can probably see, is the menus. Early on, the menus were non-existent, to be frank. I had to program the menus in afterwards because while I was working on it, I just wanted to keep working on the enemies and all the environment stuff so I could get that done first. So basically I just got most of the core gameplay done, and then I just wrote a bunch of switch statements that would move up and down based on key presses, which was pretty easy, but that made menu development a little bit harder than I was liking it to be. So we're in the first stage now, and that combo counter originally was supposed to have voice lines. I remember talking about this a little while ago. Main issue with implementing that is both time, because I've been working near constantly on most of the mechanics of this game, and I was afraid I wouldn't have it out in time to get all my other assignments done, just because I know this is like the hardest one out of them, since this is basically my baby. But yeah, so the enemy objects are all I found this to be kind of clever so far since I was experimenting with it. All the enemy objects are one object that includes the larger, higher health enemies and all the rest of them, so I didn't have to rewrite their AI. There's 2 scripts I ran constantly to allow to set this up like normal, which was SCR spawn and SCR zone, where SCR spawn basically was what put a creature into the world in the first place, and SCR zone was telling how many of those creatures you would spawn in a certain locale. Also, you may notice that after a certain amount of time I just stopped working on the flight paths. That's something I would like to try and get back on if I make later versions, which I probably will. But I have a few other things I would probably need to get done first. SCR spawn allowed it so that I could set the column, the X offset, the Y offset, the side they'd enter from, and the path that they'd travel with. So the one thing I would say that not a lot of people know from this is off the edge of the screen where those gray barriers are, the enemies are actually spawning out there and moving 1 pixel to the right every 1 in 60 frames, so that it can move towards the regular battlefield and fly in. So here's the end screen at the current moment. Real basic stuff. Shots fired, shots hit, accuracy. Yeah. There was something I was forgetting to do with that, but I pretty much finished the whole product at this current moment, so yeah. By the way, if you haven't noticed quite yet, all of these enemies are bug-based. Right now you can see all of the ant enemies in one screen. The ant inadvertently became the mascot for this because it was my first design for an enemy in this environment. It's very different than I was looking towards, because I thought, oh yeah, I can make a few sprites, whatever, it's not going to be good at all. But then they turned out really well for some reason, because I was making this to look like a lot of the Namco arrangement games, where you had these rigid shadows on the edges of stuff, and most of them were like the regular sprites, but with like shading to them. And these turned out really well, and I was so shocked by it. There's currently 20 enemies, and when I was working on this, originally the heavy enemies would have the last digit in the health counter on their sprites. That ended up being too confusing for a lot of people, because I wanted to make it so that, like, oh yeah, each color means a different 10. No, that isn't really that good of design. So I just set it so that it's percentage, and that seems to have worked out for a lot more people, so that's good. I can still use the indicator, and I don't have to waste the space I need in these bad boys for it. There's also another script I have, which, if you've probably been watching, you could tell. It's the power-ups. All of the power-ups set different variables in the player, and the player equips a power-up based on what number they get from it. That just runs the power-up script so that it'll do a one-time action and reset it once the health is gone. I actually set two different health variables for temporary health and regular health for the power-ups. The temporary health is what you're seeing right now on that red health on the bottom of the screen, and behind that was the regular health. And then there's also the bullets, which are, again, all one instance with their own AI and behavior each. I wanted to try and originally have that spread gun be its own individual bullet that would burst up at a certain point, but that's frankly too much work for the project that I'm working on at this current section, because I've already got like a bunch of these enemies, and I'd rather focus on the cool parts of this, which is the enemy variety and all of the power-up variety. And yeah, most of it was just cut because I wanted to try and make both deadlines, and I wanted to make just a way cooler script. Later on, I'm going to definitely add those back in as different bullet types that the enemies can have. But that'll also require me to reset my spawns completely, because then I'll have some bullet types not appear in certain stages, and that's going to be fun. But yeah. We're nearing the end of Zone 2, which is its own real thing. I wanted to make my original design document look like the Doom Bible, but I'm not a professional and I'm not a writing team, so that ended up being more trouble than it was worth for me. But at least I got something that looks good done, I guess. That's the best I can hope for. So right here is an example of an enemy with a deflector. Deflectors are a script thing I added in after I had a few, let's just say, violent dreams after a long time. Deflectors are just basically easy ways for lower down enemies to have more health and have different effects. There's two types of deflectors, which are the green cocoon deflectors and the yellow hex deflectors. Hex deflectors reflect projectiles, and the cocoon deflectors absorb them. Different enemies have different amounts of health on those deflectors, which I thought was an interesting development, but yeah. For the player itself, by the way, none of the UX or UI layer is drawn in the player. Only the player sprite itself is drawn in that instance. Everything else is handled through the game object. I built that to handle all of the menus and all of the components. Also, real briefly, finally died in this demo. So, all of the death messages are references to other stuff that I like. I wanted to try and make it more of like an actual insult to you if you perished easily, because it was originally my idea to try and sass the player if they were to keep messing up longer and longer. I settled on a 20 long array full of strings to call from. Also, probably throughout all of this you've noticed these nebula backgrounds. There was a tutorial I found for a lot of these that just told me what effects I need to use, and it was really concise I don't know if I have it in my favorites, but I pretty much just memorized the whole process, and now I can just create nebula backgrounds from scratch, which is really neat. The first nebula background I made was super rough. It looked alright in the back of this, but it didn't really look like a nebula per se. It had these long extruded white parts from the cloud mask I put over it on the sides, and that just didn't look good. Right now you can see a few of the different types of bugs on the screen. Those ones moving down really slowly are actually strider bugs. I wanted to convey that like same water gliding feeling on them with a different type of hazard. I've been making enemies come down real slow so that they can be themselves the obstacle to hit you with. There's also the striped enemies, which are wasps and hornets, respectively, the hornets being the bigger units. I wanted all of my enemies to look like the bugs, vaguely, but I wanted them to feel more like spaceships than real, actual bugs. There are some where you can definitely see the bug influence a lot more than the spaceship influence, but yeah. I feel like the wasp and hornet enemies are interesting designs. Had I had the time to update it and or work on it a little bit further, I would try and redo the hornet sprite so that its caution tape rotates like the wasps do, but I don't really have that luxury at the current moment. Oh well. Enemy melee is also something interesting, which I set the deflector layer on the melee layer usually, so that I can have it so that either it'll just spawn a deflector by itself or it'll spawn a deflector charging. The Caucasus, Hercules, and Bagmoth enemies all have the ability to spawn deflectors on charge, which was something I added about like last minute so I could still have a few unique enemy behaviors. And yeah, there's still a lot I would have liked to have made during all this. Originally my plan was 5 zones like classic Namco arcade games, but really early on I decided that wasn't feasible for the project that I was making. I had originally 5 weeks. I had asked to work on this 5 weeks early because, to be frank, I wanted to work on an engine I was a little bit more familiar with than Godot, and nothing on Godot. Godot is actually like way nicer than I expected any like other proprietary engine that I've used to be, but this is legit what I've grown up on, and most of what I need to learn is not the programming itself, but rather the engine and the mechanics of design. Next year I'll be taking 3D game design and like game programming, I assume. But yeah. You can see here right at the end I was really cranking out a bunch of super difficult levels because part of what people were saying in playtesting is that it was too easy. Which is why I created a bunch of enemies that I felt were almost deliberately unfair, but a lot of people seem to respond positively to them, which is good. Right here, those last couple of enemies I destroyed were the Titan moths. I found those after looking up some of the world's largest insects. The largest one would be another beetle, which I think would work, kind of, but I have, to be frank, like, what? 4 to 5 beetle enemies? I don't really think I need that much more. There's also a few design references I made with the beetle enemies. The stag and rhino beetle are actually based off of Kamen Rider. So are the other ones, but a lot less so. The stag and rhino ones are based off of Kamen Rider Kabuto, and the Zectors that are the main collectible gimmick of that series. Essentially what they are like little transformation belt devices The other ones are inspired off of partially Kabuto, but mostly 01. I designed the Caucasus Beetle after Combat Rider Thouser, which is big Caucasus armor man. I really like that suit design and that color scheme. Alrighty. Well, here is my victory screen. My initial recording of it, the victory screen broke, so I had to re-record that, which is a pain. Real briefly before I go, I'm showing off the pause function I managed to get working. F3 and escape do their own stuff, which I don't list in controls, except for like with hidden things, but yeah. I wanted those to be more hidden functions because they are not important to the gameplay, but everything works as intended, and I couldn't be happier with the way that this project turned out. Alrighty. I hope this is enough dev thoughts for a lot of people. To be honest, this was like the scariest part of the whole project, having to talk about this game. Like, there's a lot that I put into it that was just stream of consciousness, but I hope it was worth it for a lot of people, and I'm excited to see who plays it next. And eventually I might update it and put it on Steam. Who knows? If people like it that much, I think that would be a good idea. Anyway, this is Rigby Bradshaw, signing off.